My name is Kristen Covey, and I am an educator with the King County Wastewater Treatment Division. And this is our first class in our Sustainable Yard Care series. And this class is called Laying a Healthy Foundation, the Dirt on Soil, Compost, and Mulch. I am not the speaker today. I am the facilitator and tech support. But we do have two fabulous speakers here. We have Kat Gowan, who is with the King County Wastewater Treatment Division. And we also have David Jackson, who's with the Snohomish Conservation District. And I will let them introduce themselves a little bit more in a few minutes. This class is being recorded, as you probably noticed, which means that it will be available later. We will also be providing a PDF of all the slides. So if you want to just relax and not take a lot of notes, you can just know that you'll get all these slides later in an email. And we'll also be sending in that email all the links to resources that are mentioned in this presentation as well. All right, so this series is best suited for folks that are new to yard care and gardening, that are looking for a little extra help to get started, some information, some motivation to get out there. But if you're someone that's a little more seasoned, hopefully this will be a good review for you. And definitely the resources we provide will give you a deeper dive into this topic as well. Okay, so I'm gonna try to launch a poll. It's been a long time since I've been on Zoom. I've been on Teams a lot. So I'm going to just ask people if you've joined this class or these classes in the past. I'm just curious to know how many new folks we have and who is someone that has been here before, either in person or online. So let me try to do this, and you don't have to participate. And it's obviously anonymous. So hopefully you can see that poll. So yeah, let us know if you've joined one of our classes in the past, either online or in person. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, and I think it should launch the results. So share results. So we have, oh yeah, I have like not sure, can't remember, which I think is necessary in these days. Yeah, so 73% of you have not taken a class with us. So welcome. And 24% of you have. So this is good. Thank you for participating in the poll. So let's see the next slide. All right, so those of you that are new, I just wanted to provide a little background on the series. So it's brought to you by a partnership between the King County Wastewater Treatment Division and the Snohomish Conservation District. And this is our 7th year doing this series, which is wild to me. And it continues to grow and expand every year. Granted, it's been easy to expand in the last couple of years due to the pandemic and doing them online, but that's a benefit of it. We've been able to have a larger reach and have people join us from like Iowa. So yeah, we are excited to have another series start again this year. And I'd like to draw your attention to the box on this slide. It's showing you all the upcoming classes, the topics, and the dates. We have 6 in total this year. And just in general, they're going to be every Saturday at 10 a.m. from now until February 12th. So feel free to join us for all of these if you'd like to. And in the past, we have, oh, actually, let me back up. This year, we also decided to pre-record one of our classes. So we've already made that video, and you'll get a link to that in the email as well. And that one is all about yard design and kind of starting from scratch. So if you're someone that has a new home or wants to start over in your yard, that would be a really good class for you to watch. So you will be able to see that video soon. But all of these classes will be posted in the same place on the King County Wastewater Treatment Division's YouTube page. So yes, in the past, we've gathered in person, and we used to hold these classes at one of our wastewater treatment plants at an education center, which is what this photo in the middle is showing you. And this wastewater treatment plant is actually located just over the Snohomish County line just over the county line in Snohomish County. And so that's why the King County Wastewater Treatment Division thought it would be a perfect partnership to join with the Snohomish Conservation District to offer these classes. Both agencies have a passion for improving water quality, and we also share the same community members. All right, so just a quick word on our agency. So the King County Wastewater Treatment Division has a really large service area. So this tiny map in the bottom right corner is showing you the service area. And it's basically Western Washington, or sorry, Western King County and Southwestern Snohomish County. And in the service area, there's about 1.8 million people that we clean water for. So obviously, cleaning wastewater is a huge part of what we do, but we also provide educational opportunities and support to the communities we serve. And one small way we do that is by offering these free classes to promote a healthy environment. And we also have a pretty robust school program for 4th through 12th grade students and also family programs, which is what these other photos are showing you. Moving on to the logistics of this class. So Kat and David will be presenting separately for about 30 minutes each. And we're gonna primarily be using the chat box for communicating. So feel free during their presentations to ask questions in the chat box. And the person not presenting will do their best to respond to those questions. And at the end of each speaker, we'll leave about 5 to 10 minutes to open it up for Q&A. And we will then address any questions we didn't answer in the chat box. And then obviously people can answer more questions or ask more questions. If the chat box is not easy for you to use, during the Q&A sessions, feel free to use the raise your hand button, which is one of the reactions at the bottom bar. And that way you can just ask your question verbally. All right, and then the last thing I want to do is one more poll. And this will help kind of just give us a read on what type of property or yard you have. So I'm gonna try to, let's see. And this will hopefully cover all of your options, but if not, I apologize. So which best describes your property or yard? Do you have a small rural property, large rural, small suburban or urban, large suburban or urban, or is it an apartment with a balcony, deck, or patio? All right, so we have 7% small rural, another 7% for large rural. Okay, so 14% rural, 45% are in a small suburban or urban, 34% are in a large suburban or urban, and 7% in apartment. Awesome. That's another good range. Okay, that's useful for us to know. Okay, so I am going to pass it on to Kat Gowan, who is going to be our first speaker. However, I will be running her slides because she unfortunately got stuck in Leavenworth because of all the crazy snow we've had on the passes. So that was not part of the plan. So we do apologize in advance if it's, I don't know, hopefully it'll go well with me advancing her slides, but it might be a little bit wonky. So I will pass it over to Kat.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. I'm sure you're going to do great.
Thanks.
But because of where I am, I can't see any of you. I can't see the chat box. I can't see the presentation while I am presenting. So you'll just have to hope for the best. Okay. So in the US, we use 9 billion gallons of water for our lawns and gardens every single day. That's the same as filling 20 million bathtubs. And click, what's worse, 50% of that water is wasted through evaporation, runoff, or overwatering. And since you're all attending a sustainable yard care class, I feel comfortable assuming that you're interested in bringing some of those numbers down. And what would you do if I told you that soil is actually a huge part in how we can do that? Right. My name is Kat Gowan, and I help King County residents and some Snohomish County residents add nutrients and carbon back to farms, forests, and gardens through the use of their transformed poop, known as biosolids. I work for the biosolids team at the Wastewater Treatment Division, and we oversee the distribution of Loop, which is King County's biosolids product. Loop is just one example of a product that helps develop a strong foundation for your yard. And my goal today is to have you all leave here with an understanding of why soil is important and how you can build and maintain healthy soil in your landscaping. First, I just want to have you type into the chat what soil means to you or how you perceive soil. So I'll just give you a few seconds to type in some stuff. Yep, dirt. I'm going to talk about the difference between dirt and soil a little bit later. Surface of the planet, healthy plants, food for plants and bugs. That's all right. Growing medium, basis of a healthy garden. Great. Foundation of life. Yes, I agree. Nutrients, delicious, safe food. Yeah, it's the foundation of the yard. Exactly. A mysterious thing I want to understand how to build. Oh, I love that. David and I are going to do our best to help you. Living bioloam. Perfect. All right. Healthy and luscious garden. Great. You all have a great start in what soil is and what it means. All right, so click next. All right, so why should we care about soil? You all have the beginnings of understanding why you should care about soil, but it is the foundation of our ecosystem, and it's going to influence everything that you try to do with your yards. So having a healthy soil will help you conserve water. It will help you grow more food and flowers. It's going to decrease the need for pesticides and fertilizers and basically set you up for success. So soil sounds really great. How does it accomplish all of these wonders? It turns out it's pretty complicated, but let's go ahead and start with the basics. So first of all, what is soil? Soil is made up of three parts. There are mineral components, that's like rocks. There's pore space, so those are pockets for air and water. And then there's a small amount of something called organic matter. In Western Washington, about 2 to 10% of soil is organic matter. And organic matter is critically important to soil health. It's full of billions of microorganisms and other larger animals and fungi, all working together to break down dead and decomposing things. The process of creating soil is excruciatingly slow. It takes 1,000 years to make an inch of soil, but it is a dynamic and living thing. It's just pretty slow. So what's dirt? Dirt is soil without structure or organic matter. It's basically the crumbled up rocks of the planet. Okay, so what you want to do in this class, of course, is get to know your own soil. And I'm going to try to show you a couple of things that you can look at to get started, to get to know what you're dealing with, because soil varies wildly from place to place, even within the same region or the same neighborhood, or sometimes even within the same yard. So it's important to assess your soil specifically instead of just relying on generalizations. So I'm going to go through several characteristics of soil that you can evaluate in order to set yourself up for success. But the first thing that you should do is you should test your soil. And I can't stress this enough. You really should test your soils before you do anything too extreme. King County Conservation District will test your soil for free, I think up to 5 free tests. Snohomish County will help you test your soil for a small charge. And the conservation districts are available to help teach you how to sample your soil, tell you where to send it, help you interpret the results. So you should make use of their expertise. And if you get one thing from this talk, it should be that testing your soil is a really valuable thing for you to do. When it comes to soil, there are some things you can change and some things that you just need to know about so you can work with it successfully. And I'll try to identify which ones are the things you actually have some control over. So first, soil pH. Soil pH is how acidic or basic your soil is. And the pH of your soil is going to affect both your soil organisms, so the things that live in your soil, and as well as the ability of the plants in your soil to absorb nutrients. Generally speaking, most plants like a pH somewhere between 6 and 7.5. As you can see on the pH scale on this slide, that's basically neutral to a little bit acidic. It's the same pH as milk or blood. But some plants like something a little bit different. Strawberries and blueberries, for instance, are a little more acidic. Sunflowers and vegetables are often happier with a true neutral, that true 7. And hydrangeas, you may know this, they actually get their colors based on the soil pH. So they can live in multiple pHs, but they're different colors depending on where they're growing. You can alter your pH using lime or wood ash to make it less acidic. Pine needles and a bunch of other organic materials can make your soil more acidic. Sulfur can also make your soil more acidic, but none of these are really forever options, especially if you're looking at things on a yard or landscape scale. So you might want to consider adjusting what you plant based on the pH of your soil rather than trying to change your soil pH. A lot of soils in the Pacific Northwest are a little bit more acidic because of all of the pine trees and the fir trees. So that's something that soil testing will tell you that's helpful for you to know, so you don't plant plants that are going to hate your soil. Soil texture is another example of something that you want to work with instead of trying to change. It refers to the relative percentages of sand, clay, and silt in the soil. So if you have a sandy soil, the soils are light and they don't hold their shape when they're squeezed, whereas clay soils are heavy and they can be shaped. And unless you want to dig out all of the soil in your yard and replace it, you're probably not going to influence the soil texture of your yard. It kind of is what it is. And now we're going to try watching a short video. Hopefully this will work with everybody's internet that kind of shows you how to assess soil texture in your yard.
Okay, here we go.
I'm going to mute myself while this is playing.
I'm Ashley Miley. I'm a project manager with King County's Loop Biosolids program, and I'm here to tell you how to assess your soil texture so that you can know what kind of soil you have in your garden to help your plants grow better. It's also just a fun activity to get outside the house with your kids, get your hands dirty. So you just need a couple of quick and easy tools to do this. You just need a spray bottle of water. You can use anything. You could also just use a cup of water, and a trowel or some kind of gardening tool to actually dig up the soil. So here we're in this nice already kind of dug up bed. You just want to dig a few inches below the soil and get about a tablespoon and pull out any roots or leaves. Spray soil with some water. Just kind of mix it up till it's wet. You want it to be moist, but not like sopping wet muddy. And then you just roll it into a ball like Play-Doh. You tap it underneath, and if it starts to lose its shape and get kind of a sheen of water on top, then you don't have a clay soil. So this one's not a clay soil. The next thing you do is see if it's a silty soil. So you kind of form it into more of a snake and then see if you can ribbon it. So you hold it between your thumb and forefinger and you just press it and see if it grows in a ribbon. So this one ribbons, which means it's a silty soil. And then how you find out if you have a sandy soil, you just take a little pinch of it, you rub it between your thumb and your forefinger, and if it feels gritty, then it's sandy, and if it feels smooth, then it's a silt. So here we have a clay soil. We're going to roll it into a ball. And then when we tap it, see how the ball bounces around and holds its shape. That means you have a clay soil. So same thing, you roll it in a ball, and then you see, does it hold its shape, and does a little watery sheen come to the top of it. So it doesn't hold its shape, and you see that sheen. Then it's not clay. Try to ribbon it, and you can see ribbons a little bit, but see how it's breaking. So maybe has a little bit of silt, but not too much. So you take a little between your thumb and forefinger and you rub it, and this one feels both gritty and smooth. So you can feel the gritty particles, the sandy particles, and the silty particles. So it's like a sandy loam or a soil with sand and silt in it. So what do you do with this information? It doesn't matter what kind of soil texture you have, whether it's clay, sandy, or silty. All soil needs the help of organic matter. Organic matter is like compost, especially compost made with our Loop Biosolids. And compost is decomposed or dead plant and animal material that's been broken down. It helps the soil hold water. It holds 100 times its weight in water, where the soil only holds 0.2. And it also has nutrients, and all those things help plants grow. So if you have a sandy soil, it will help it hold water. If you have a clay soil, it'll help it drain. And if you have a silty soil, it helps it do a little bit of both. So when you're ready to plant, all you do is take your compost and you mix it into whatever you're planting.
right. Thank you. That was my former coworker, Ashley. She's moved on to different parts of WTD, but she's a great poop champion and lover of soil. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, onto soil structure. So soil structure is one of the first things that we really can have an impact on that I've talked about so far. So it's something that you can nurture, or it's something you can disrupt depending on your action. And an easy way to show the importance of soil structure is to look at bread and flour. So let's go to the next slide. And before I play these videos, I want you to put in the chat what you predict will happen when you pour water onto flour. Put your prediction. Yeah, runs off, floats, clumping, sticky mess, paste, beads up. Yep, good guesses. All right, so go ahead and play this first video. This is me in my kitchen having fun. If we were in person, I would have you all be doing this together, but all right. And yeah, you can see what a mess it makes. All the water's running up, off, some of it is beading. It's not staying where you're supposed to. There are all these dry spots in the flour that aren't getting any water at all. So there's that. And then what do you think is going to happen when we pour water on the bread? You can put that in the chat too. Soaks up. Yeah, exactly. Absorbed, soaks it up. Cool. You are all very good at predicting what's going to happen. So let's go ahead and play the video. And yep, you can see it just sucks it all up. So this is very similar to the difference between a dirt and a soil, and one with structure and one without structure. So baking bread and making soil are not really all that different. They both involve chemical and biological processes that can be influenced by external actions. So soil structure refers to the clumping of soil particles. So how minerals, organisms, and organic matter group together. And this can happen through biological, chemical, or physical properties. So soil clumps can be cemented together by old organic matter. They can be glued together by fungi. A lot of fungi create a sort of sticky substance. They can be frozen or soaked by weather, pushed through by roots. Earthworms can be going through and creating little tunnels. And this grouping process is key because the gaps or the pores that are left behind store water and air that are necessary for plant growth. So one of the ways that you can really mess up your soil is by disturbing those clumps and pore spaces and compacting your soil. So you saw how bread acted like a sponge in the circumstances, and how flour just kind of let the water run all over the place. But what would happen if I smushed that bread and got rid of all that pore space? It would no longer be able to soak up water. So soil compaction works in the same way. If you're consistently running heavy equipment, if you're parking your car on your lawn or something like that, or you're running heavy wheelbarrows over the same spots over and over again, you're going to lose that pore space and lose some of the potential of your soil to actually grow things. So you want to be careful to not walk on the ground in the same way all the time, or run all those equipment over there. And also try not to work in your yard when the soil is very wet or very dry, because that's when the soil structure is most fragile. There are a couple ways to fix compacted soil. You can add earthworms. You can try aerating it. Easiest way to do it is to work in organic matter or compost. So let's talk about amending your soil. Amending soil is basically all about adding organic matter in order to improve the soil. It's a key part in creating a robust soil structure and ensuring a more biodiverse soil community. So organic matter, unlike soil texture or pH, can be managed long-term. Organic matter, as Ashley was talking about, is the living, the dead, and the very dead. And it's made up of all of the soil organisms, the recently deceased plant and animal matter, and the very, very decomposed and stable residues from all the life happening on top of the planet. This last part is called the humus. and the average age of humus in soil is 1,000 years old. So it's old stuff. And organic matter acts as that sponge for water, and that can radically decrease your water bill, which is always a plus. It's also where all of the soil organisms live that help decrease your need for herbicides or pesticides, and it acts as nutrient storage for your plants. So compost is probably the best and easiest way to add organic matter to your soil. And David's going to be talking a little bit more about that in his presentation. I also want to mention briefly that urban soils are a sort of difficult thing to work with, and a lot of you probably will be working with urban soils. Urban soils are man-made, and they're produced by mixing, filling, or contaminating the top 20 or so inches of soil. There can be a variety of issues to tackle if you have urban soil, like a lot of compaction, a complete lack of nutrients or biodiversity, and that might make all of it a little bit slow going. Adding compost, adding that organic matter is eventually going to restore or regenerate those soils. But depending on your starting point, you might want to make raised beds in your yard instead of trying to grow things straight into the ground. And somebody mentioned in the chat that there might be concerns about contaminants of heavy metals and things like that. That can be true. Like Tacoma, for instance, had the Tacoma smelter, and that did a lot of air deposition of contaminants. And so having a raised bed and creating your own soil mix can be a good solution for those sorts of issues. But an important thing to keep in mind is that a lot of those contaminants don't actually get into the plants themselves, don't get into what you're eating. So if you use gardening gloves and you wash your hands after you work with it, for the most part, you're going to be set. So let's talk about those nutrients. We saw how important soil structure and organic matter are for water conservation and runoff, but that capacity to hold water also applies to the ability to hold on to nutrients long enough for plants to use them. So what nutrients do you all know about? Go ahead and put that in the chat. What are the, when I started this job, I knew about nitrogen. Yes. And that's about it. There we go. Okay, we've got potassium, we've got iron, phosphorus, minerals, NPK, right? That's the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That K one can mess people up. Magnesium, micronutrients. Y'all are way ahead of where I was when I first took this class a couple years ago. Calcium, coffee grounds, totally. Coffee grounds can add good organic matter to your soil. Okay. So most of you know about nitrogen. Many of you know about several other nutrients, but plants actually need about 13 to 16 different mineral nutrients. They're broken up into macronutrients and micronutrients. And macronutrients are needed in higher quantities, and micronutrients are needed in small but crucial amounts. So the macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the ones you hear about all the time. Sort of medium level macronutrients are sulfur and calcium, but then you have the micronutrients, which are things like magnesium, iron, molybdenum, boron, copper, manganese, sodium, nickel, zinc, chlorine. It gets a little overwhelming, but they are needed. Like manganese, for instance, is a critical part of plants' abilities to photosynthesize. So that while that may feel very overwhelming to keep track of, there are fortunately easy ways to provide everything that plants need. So let's go ahead and talk about fertilizing your plants. So there are a bewildering array of fertilizer sources from which to choose, but they come in two main categories. You've got chemical or synthetic fertilizers, and then you've got organic fertilizers. And I don't mean organic in the capital O organic, but organic in terms of just containing carbon and living kinds of things. So chemical or synthetic fertilizers are convenient in a lot of ways because you know the exact concentration of nutrients you're going to get. They say right on the label how much is in there, and they are generally fast releasing. So if you have a plant that needs a real, like an espresso shot of nutrients, synthetic fertilizers can be really helpful for that. But they are much harder on the environment. They don't help you build organic matter, so they're not really amending your soil. They're just providing kind of like fast food to your plants. And you have to be really cautious to not over fertilize. And additionally, if you do over fertilize, they can cause serious problems. So for instance, phosphorus was legally removed from many fertilizers because plants can only use a certain amount. People were adding too much, and that phosphorus was building up in the soil, and then it was running off into our waterways and causing things like algal blooms. So that's problematic. Organic fertilizers, on the other side, are things like compost of all kinds, gypsum, earthworm castings, manures of all sorts, including human manures, fish and kelp fertilizers, etc. The main difference between synthetic fertilizers and organic fertilizers is the amount of fossil fuels needed to actually produce these things, as well as the presence of carbon and organic matter. And that carbon and organic matter present in your organic fertilizers is holding on to the nutrients over the long term so that plants get what they need. And then as the organic matter breaks down further, they get more nutrients as they need it. So they're called slow release nutrients, and they help build your soil. So if you don't know exactly what nutrients are in your soil or what your plants need, it's far safer to use a compost rather than a chemical fertilizer, because you've got that slow release rather than dumping it all in at once and then having the plant go, oh, I don't need all of that, and having the rest of it run off into Puget Sound. Okay, hopefully now you all understand how critical soil health is to landscaping success. But how do you make sure that you are protecting and building that fabulous and all-important soil? So one option that I think is really fun is cover cropping. Cover cropping is a great low-cost and wildlife-friendly way to keep down weeds and keep your soil organisms happy and warm in the winter, and just generally keep your soil healthy. It can also add more nitrogen into your garden beds because you can, plow your cover crop into the soil where it then dies and adds extra food for your plants that you want to grow. Common cover crops include things like cereal rye or clover, annual ryegrass, oats, things like that. I've planted clover in the past, and while the rabbits will eat most of it, the roots are still doing good work and providing food for the things that I want to grow after the cover crop. It keeps soil from eroding away during our very wet winters. It kind of holds onto the soil and provides food for the microorganisms over time. You can also cover your soil with mulch if you don't want to deal with planting something and having to dig it up and turn it into your soil in the spring. You're going to learn a lot more about mulch and the value of mulch in the next presentation. The other kinds of things that you can do is you can lessen soil disturbance. So you can create deliberate walkways in your landscape, and so you're not running equipment over gardening beds. You can also use those slow release fertilizers and soil amendments. You can be cautious about really messing with the pH, so you're not getting radical shifts in any of your environment, which will help the biodiversity in your soil remain healthy. And you can also stop raking up your leaves. Just let your leaves lie on your yard and in your garden beds. If you can't stand the mess, then have those deliberate walkways and then put the leaves on your garden beds. It's great free mulch, and your insects and your animals are going to love it. So that's the basics. Next slide would just the takeaway is that understanding and taking care of your soil is going to set you up for success. And I do have a bunch of resources available on the next slide that will be sent out to you. And if you have any questions, obviously you can talk to me or anybody in the education team at WTD will get you set up to ask whatever you need. So I am available for any questions. I know this is kind of a lot of high level information all dumped at you at the same time. So feel free to either unmute yourself and ask questions or put it in the chat. Now I'm going to switch over so that I can see all of you and look at what's happening.
And I'm also going to, excuse me, stop sharing in case I need to see.
Yes, we can all see each other. It's great.
Yeah, so we have about, I'd say, 5 to 10 minutes if we want for some questions.
Okay, so Anne has raised beds. If I don't do a cover crop, will nutrients leach out of the soil? It kind of depends on how enclosed your raised beds are, but your nutrients are going to kind of settle throughout the thing and maybe be out of reach of the roots of whatever you're trying to plant. So a cover crop would be a great way to keep your nutrients more up at the top, or you can just, when you are ready to plant in the raised beds, or if you're refreshing the soil of your raised beds, you can add your compost in, or your fish fertilizers, your kelp fertilizers, those kinds of things. You can add them in when you are planting instead of letting it sit. And then David looks like he has other thoughts, so you should jump in.
Actually, what I wanted to say is before we move on, because we're getting a lot of questions coming in now, I want to make Beth Ballas' question doesn't get buried. In a wild or large setting with very sandy soil, can you leave a cover crop, or do you have to turn it to gain soil building? And Kat's going to say the same thing that I am, which is no.
Yeah, no, you don't have to do the work of turning. That's really, if you just want to have clover or whatever in your large areas, your animals are going to be happy, your soil is going to be happy. You don't have to do anything with that.
In fact, if you are, especially with things like clover that fix nitrogen, if you're constantly turning and exposing those microorganisms to air, you might actually be slowing your soil building down.
Yeah. Yes, it's just if you want the cover crop just for the winter season, and then you have a plan for the spring, you turn it over. If you don't have a plan, like I frequently don't have a plan, just leave it there. Everyone's going to be happy. I think that's one of the big takeaways of soil is, you add organic matter of some kind, and then you are patient. The more patient you are, the happier your soil is going to be. If it's covered and not being exposed to a bunch of runoff and a bunch of, cold weather or anything like that, it's going to be building. It's going to be doing what it needs to do. Okay, where can I get weed-free mulch? I haven't been running into too many weeds in my mulch. I go up to just a nursery and get bulk mulch. But compost, depending on how it is processed, can still have weeds if it's not industrially composted. So it's not getting up to really high temperatures. So a lot of I'm sure David's going to go over a lot of this in his next presentation, but most industrially composted stuff like Cedar Grove stuff is getting to high enough temperatures that anything but the most tenacious of weeds is going to be handled.
We're gonna talk about it, but the trick to getting weed-free mulch and compost is temperature and source, and we'll get more into that in just a second.
Great. Yeah. Okay, should we consider or be concerned about the pH of commercial bagged soil affecting ours? I would say that unless you are adding a tremendous amount of soil, it probably is not going to be influencing the pH of your soil. It really is hard to do long-term changes to pH in a yard. In a raised bed, you can have an impact, so you might want to think about it. But I would say most commercial or bagged soil is probably pretty close to neutral, maybe a little bit acidic. So you're not going to be getting bags of soil that are like at a 4 pH or something like that. So you're probably safe.
When I was working on building a farm, we actually used horse manure, and if we were putting it in beds, we added lye and coconut coir. If we put it out just on the field, we didn't even bother with it.
Right, exactly. It's a matter of concentration. So if your bagged soil is a different pH and it's going into a small amount of soil, then yeah, it might have an impact. But if it's spread over your yard, don't worry about it. Okay, how does one get rid of thatch? I have no idea.
Thatch is compostable, but it's going to take a little bit of extra work and a lot of patience. Yeah, I don't know. Let me think about that. Let me think about that and get back to you. Yeah, we might let's maybe cover this one at the end after we've gone through the composting section. And if we still can't give you a satisfactory answer, we'll follow up with some resources.
Excellent. Good. Okay. I like to upcycle things. So how do you feel about reusing filing cabinets as raised beds to grow vegetables? I think that might work. If they might rust, depending on what they're made out of. So I don't know how long they're going to last. But people use things like those zinc lined water trough kinds of things for horses. People use those for growing vegetables. For the most part, that kind of stuff is fine because plant uptake of metals is pretty complex and is influenced by a wide variety of factors, but unless you've got really high concentrations of a lot of these contaminants, they're not going to be getting into the actual food that you eat. So you're probably fine. I would just be concerned about it rusting and not lasting as long as you might want. And you might want to avoid growing, say, root vegetables in a bed like that. You maybe don't grow your potatoes and your carrots in there, but if you want to, and maybe not your leafy greens either, but tomatoes probably okay, zucchini probably okay, squash, things like that. Yeah, so I would be a little cautious about what you grow in anything like that. Any other additions to?
Take a look at what it's painted in. If really old, it might be some toxic paint that you're going to want to strip out and dispose of separately. And then, yeah, Kat nailed it. A lot of plants that grow on vines or through bushes, berries, things like that, will do a better job of kind of filtering out through the soil and the roots. Things that like carrots, potatoes, onions don't do as good of a job with that.
Yeah. Yep. And leafy greens, for some reason, like to uptake a lot of stuff. So just think about what you're growing there. Okay. Is it better to put the compost on top or dig in? You can do both. Usually when I am planting something, I will dig my hole, dig the appropriate size hole for the plant. I'll put a little bit of regular soil in, and then I'll layer in some compost, and then I'll put a top dressing of compost on top. So a mix of things, but if you are just adding compost to your yard and things are already growing there, but you want to give them a little bit of boost, a top dressing on top of will be fine, because as it breaks down and as it rains, the nutrients are going to break down and go into the soil where the roots will take them up.
Somebody asked a question about types of soil and composting. And I said my answer to them, because they direct message me, and what I'll say here again now, is that I would, if you're amending into clay, clay is a little bit harder to amend. That's where I would break up the surface level. If you have clay deep down, I wouldn't worry about it. But if you have clay in the first maybe like 2 inches, going through and breaking it up a little bit might give you a little bit nicer growing medium.
Yeah, absolutely. Because clay doesn't have as big pore space. So you need to give your plants a little bit of help to get their roots in there and allow space for the nutrients to go in and water to go in. Yep. Absolutely. Okay, is it better to leave large leaves like maple leaves intact or chop them up a bit with a mower? Honestly, they're designed to fall on the ground intact, and if you don't want to do anything with them, they're going to break down and do what they need to do. I don't see any concern with breaking them up with the mower. They're still going to add to your soil, but it's really a matter of how much effort you want to put into it.
I will contradict Kat just a little bit there.
Okay.
Please do leave them intact, because they actually form habitat when they are fully intact. Okay. If you are absolutely bound and determined to do something like chop them up into a finer mulch or use them as brown material for composting, like we'll talk about in a second, rake them away somewhere and chop them up elsewhere. That way you are just destroying someone's home as opposed to possibly killing the occupants. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, and that's based on research from the Xerxes Society.
Great.
All right, I'm going to actually stop the questions right now, except I do want to honor the one audience member who has their hand up, and I will save the other questions that we didn't answer in the chat currently for the end of the talk, but I just want to make sure that David has enough time to do his presentation. And I think we can probably go over a few minutes at past 11:30 if there are more questions, not too long, but yeah. So I would like to ask Carol if she would like to answer or ask her question.
I have a planter strip alongside my house that has the grass, which is a walkway. And now with the pandemic and people with their dogs, it's become the toilet for everything. The quality of the dirt around the trees, the acid burns, I don't know what to do.
Well, what I would do in that situation is maybe sheet mulch it and just add a bunch of organic matter and also make it less appealing to use. And David's going to talk about sheet mulching, and I would just kind of add enough organic matter to it that it kind of dilutes the chemicals that the dogs are putting into it. I think that would be the way that I would go. And plus that'll, if you don't want grass there, that'll kill the grass eventually, and you can just put it all in and then plant something like some kind of ground cover that maybe is really hardy or really tolerant to some abuse, or something that is unappealing for animals to walk through. One of those might be a good option. And sheet mulching is super easy, as David will explain. It's really, especially on a narrow kind of verge planter area. That would be the direction I would go. David or Kristen might have different ideas.
Yeah, we're going to talk about sheet mulching once I get into it. And I think that, yeah, if you're allowed to plant there, I think that might be your best bet. Put in some stuff that can handle people having their pets go there.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thanks for all the questions, everyone. Yeah, so thank you, Kat, for a great presentation, and I will now turn it over to David.
All right. Thanks so much, Kat and Kristen. So we're going to talk about building healthy soil, specifically mulch and compost. We're going to first do the least exciting part of this, and we're going to talk, well, actually, the conservation district is the most exciting part of this. If people are not familiar with a conservation district and what a conservation is and does, the core of what we do is provide free technical assistance to people in Snohomish County and Camino Island. Every county has a conservation district, so wherever you are coming from, you probably have a conservation district that you can rely on. I know we have people from Iowa and Florida. You may have something called that's named similarly. If it's not a conservation district, it might be a soil and water conservation district or a soil conservation district. Ideally, we are working with landowners to try to implement BMPs, best management practices. This means a lot of different things, mainly focused around soil and water quality. The bottom line for all of this text that you have here is, if you are wondering something about your soil, about how to manage your soil better, give us a call. We'll have contact information at the end, and we will be more than happy to come out and give you some recommendations. So this is the least exciting part. We're going to talk a little bit about myself, just so you know who I am and why I'm saying what I'm saying. My background is in landscape and project management. That's how I paid through. I paid for college, was as a landscaper. You got that picture over there of me on the left in my natural habitat. I attended the University of Washington, Bothell, became an environmental scientist with the Conservation District. My current title is a Community Conservation Program Manager. So we're going to start out with a little bit of a discussion of compost versus mulch, because they do get used interchangeably, and sometimes that is appropriate. But we're going to talk about the differences, because this presentation is all about the differences. So mulch is defined as materials such as decaying leaves, bark, or compost spread around or over a plant to enrich or insulate the soil. So the key takeaway from this is still decaying. Both of these are organic organic compounds that are put down. Both of them are soil amendments, but mulch is still in the process of decaying. They are more intact, so they might be less bioavailable, meaning it's less, it's not as easy for plants to take that material up, which means they are going to do things like protect and insulate heat and moisture. Meaning in the summer, they're going to keep soil cooler and wetter, and in the winter, they're going to keep soil warmer and drier. Compost is decayed organic material uses plant fertilizer. So this is material that is already broken down. So it is less intact and more bioavailable, meaning it has nutrients, and in some cases, depending on the composition, may even be a growing medium. You can use them similarly, but not always. When we use the term amendment, we're usually talking about either adding a specific nutrient or fertilizer, but in the context of this, we're talking about adding mulch or compost. So it's a lot of information. It's going to be more apparent as we go. I just wanted to give you that quick overview before we got started. Mulch is still decaying and is meant for protection, insulation, as well as nutrients. Compost has been decayed and is meant specifically for nutrients. So appropriate that we talked about sheet mulching. That's one of the first things that we will jump into. This is kind of the easiest, most effective form of mulching. If you are looking to kill grass or suppress some kind of growth going on, weed growth or something inside your yard, and say, I want to move on to something else. This method is extremely easy. I have never met someone who is just unable to wrap their head around sheet mulching, and it can either be extremely cheap or free, depending on where you're getting the materials. The goal of sheet mulching is you're adding a lot of material that is going to slowly degrade over time, but in the meantime, it's going to protect or change growth patterns. So the two key words, check your vocabulary lists, are biodegradation and bioturbation. Biodegradation means things breaking down. Bioturbation means things moving through the soil. So when Kat earlier was talking about worms and bugs and things like that in the soil moving around and creating those pores, that's bioturbation. How does sheet mulching help with that? Once it goes down over the top, stuff wants to come up from the soil to eat it as it breaks down. As it works its way up, it creates those pores and holes, which breaks up the soil and allows nutrients that are going to come from the top, because that's where you put the organic material, to work their way down. The bottom line of sheet mulching is that it is adding layers of organic material. So you're adding multiple layers, usually 2, possibly 3, on top of the soil in order to work their way down. And this is something that you can do very quickly and easily, but it is a somewhat slow process. So how to sheet mulch tomorrow? Because usually that's the question that we get. Is, okay, I understand a little bit about this, but I don't even know how to get started. Well, you could start this tomorrow in all likelihood. You could say, I think it's going to rain tomorrow, so I don't suggest starting it tomorrow, but you could if you wanted to. So the first step is to mark out your area. You can do this with marker paint. You can do this with flags. You can do this with a drawing, or you can go through and actually just remove the grass if you want to. But mark out the area that you want to do. Some people skip this step. Don't skip this step. Make sure that you know exactly where you want to do it, because you are going to need to figure out how much material you need, and you don't want to run out or have left over. The second step is to lay down the first layer. Your first layer is going to depend on how quickly you want to plant or utilize this or build your soil. You can use newspaper if it's an area that just has like maybe some moss, sprinkled grass, not much going on. It degrades very quickly. It's not hard to cut through. You can put it down, put some wood chips over the top of it, plant right into it, no big deal. Cardboard is easily the most popular. Those Amazon boxes finally coming in handy. Make sure you remove all the tape and everything. It degrades more slowly. This one can take maybe a couple years to really break down, but it can be cut through. And if you're trying to get rid of vegetation to plant something else, this will suppress that vegetation for multiple seasons. Burlap is sort of the nuclear option. It degrades very slowly. It is hard to cut through. But if you are looking to make, for instance, a path, or you go, I want this whole area to be fallow and break down very slowly over the next 5 years, burlap is great for that. If you are thinking to yourself, where the heck, David, do I even get burlap? I got you covered. We're gonna talk about that in a little bit. The third step is to add a layer of mulch or wood chips. We'll talk about where to get mulch or wood chips, but you want some layer of mulch over the top of your first layer. And then the fourth step is to plant if you are ready. If you're not, that's fine. You can always come back. But if you are ready to plant, you can go ahead and get started straight away. You don't need to wait for this to break down to plant into it. In fact, one of the great things about sheet mulching is if you start it, you can have an area that looks very much like an intended garden bed area without grass and with nice plants and wood chips around. No one even has to know that underneath there's a whole bunch of cardboard or burlap. So sheet mulching resources, I told you I had you covered. If you need to find newspaper, libraries are a great source of that. Libraries have a lot of newspaper and they tend to recycle fairly regularly. I have not yet met a librarian who said, no, I won't give you my newspaper. I desperately want to throw it in the recycling bin. They're more than happy to give it up usually. Cardboard. Grocery stores are still a great place to get this. They have a lot of it. It's usually thick. You want to avoid the stuff that's been waxed or has a wax coating on it. A lot of, I don't know if this is true of everywhere, a bunch of my friends just recently moved with the housing market the way that it is, and all of them are desperate to get rid of their boxes. So if you want to just go bug your friends and say, I'll take that cardboard off your hands, there you go. Burlap, coffee shops. Starbucks no longer does this, fortunately, or at least the ones that I used to go to, but small independent coffee stands and coffee shops will have a lot of burlap because that is what the beans come in. And they will usually either give it to fabric shops or recycle it in different ways. If you get there first, you might be able to get some. Arborists are a great place to get wood chips. If you do not know your local arborist, a quick Google search will find them. If you do not want to do that, there is a service called Chip Drop, which we will talk about a little bit later. There's some kind of rules for Chip Drop to get good wood chips. If you're looking for leaves as your mulch, ask your neighbors. Neighbors sometimes want their leaves raked up. Offer to rake up your neighbor's leaves. Haul them back over to your place. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about soil and composting. Some composting basics, because this is going to be very much composting basics. There are entire books and legions of advice about composting. Some of it is even good advice that is more than easily available for people who want to learn more about this. So we're going to do very, very basic composting just so you can kind of orient yourself on the subject. Think of this as like the Wikipedia entry for composting. The goal is not, you're not going to walk away with an expert understanding, but you're going to kind of understand the topic enough to know the next questions to ask. So composting at its essence creates topsoil. Topsoil is, and this is a massive oversimplification, but topsoil is at its base decomposed organic material. If you are composting, you are trying to speed that process up, take your organic material, decompose it as fast as possible, and put it down as a method. Compost can either be spreadable or in situ, meaning in place. We'll talk a little bit about in situ composting as we're talking about types of composting. And then finally, you can make your own compost from yard and food waste. If that sentence scares you a little bit because you go, oh my gosh, yard and food waste seems like such a vague term, we're going to talk about things you should and should not put in compost in a very general way. Again, there's a lot of resources out there telling you kind of what is and is not safe to add, so do not fear. So making your own compost. So 4 major elements to making your own compost. Again, in a very broad sense. The first is green material. We talked about NPK. Those are the 3 macronutrients. Compost has its own 3 macronutrients: coffee, fruit peels, and eggshells. Coffee beans or coffee grounds, fruit peels like banana peels, and then crushed up eggshells are the most common and most commonly used green material. The goal for them, for green material, is you want it to be relatively full of nitrogen, I said nitrogen and calcium. Those are the 2 things you really, really want. You don't want to worry too much about potassium, but you want specifically to have lots of nitrogen and lots of calcium. Brown material is full of carbon. You may be thinking to yourself, why does we need to have carbon in compost? Brown material is there to stabilize the compost to a certain degree. The idea is that the carbon material is going to help with the reaction, and it's going to keep your compost at a relatively even area. Leaves, sawdust, straw, and paper are the 4 most common. If you're thinking to yourself, where the heck am I going to get that stuff? Newspaper, recycling, shred that stuff up. Sawdust, you can get in a lot of different places. Straw, leaves, obviously from your yard. You can pick up straw in bales if you have a large enough operation, and then just keep it in a bucket or some kind of container right next to your compost. And then when you toss stuff in, you can just grab a handful and toss them brown as well. As far as turning, so then the other element of it is turning. And turning actually controls for the 2 other major components, which are which is air and moisture. The rule of thumb for turning is you want to do it about once a week. If it is raining, you want to do it more often. In the summer, you also want to do it more often. The reason you want to do it more often if it's raining or if it's in the summer, which, by the way, raining or summer are basically the 2 seasons that Seattle has. You want to, the reasons you want to distribute the temperature or you want to distribute the moisture. You do want your compost hot, or warm, I should say. You do not want it necessarily hot. You also want your compost moist. You do not necessarily want it wet. So air and the other aspect of turning is you're going to distribute air and contact with the soil. Again, the microorganisms that are going to actually do the composting are in the soil. So you want to move the bin around so that it has access to the soil, and then to distribute moisture. We're going to talk a little bit about heat and moisture a little bit later on. If you're going, great, all of that sounds good, but I have no idea how to even build one of these things. Well, there's basically three general categories. The first one is bins. These are the easiest to build, hardest to turn, and they do have contact with the soil. There are many, many types of these. You can have raised bins, you can have open bins, you can have stacks, which are a kind of bin, which I generally don't recommend for a few different reasons, unless you have a large area to work with. But these are the basic ones that you've probably seen before. They can be as simple as like 4 pallets jammed together or 3 pallets jammed together on the side. Tumblers are raised and enclosed. They usually have a way for them to spin. They are the easiest to turn. So if you're going, gosh, grabbing a pitchfork and constantly, like turning that once a week, I don't know if I can do that. Tumbler might be for you. Go ahead and just turn it, and it actually rotates everything. If you do decide to use a tumbler, note that it does not have contact with the soil. You may need to grab a shovel of good soil first to start that reaction. And then digesters, which is sort of a weird cousin for composting, but can be very helpful for some people. They don't turn. You do add brown or green, but you don't take the compost and move it, put it elsewhere. Instead, you move the digester. So you dig down and you get actually in contact with the soil. And the goal of a digester is to just work. It's essentially like a pit, like a composting trash pit almost. And you work it into the soil, and then once it gets full, you just uproot the digester and move it to a different part of your yard. These are very helpful in very specific scenarios. If you would like to know more about digesters, please let me know. There's a lot of conversations on these. I'm adding them here because they are something that might be a good option for some people. So speaking of turning, internally, you want your compost to be about 130 degrees. If that sounds like, David, I am not going to go out and actually measure the temperature of my compost, no problem. I'm giving you that temperature as a benchmark. So you can look at something and go, no, that's probably more than 130 degrees. Then you need to go ahead and turn it. You want to turn more often in the hot months. You want to turn it less often in cold and dry months. Other aspect of turning is air. You want to increase airflow. The microorganisms that are actually doing the composting for you are aerobic, meaning that they breathe. So you want to make sure that they have adequate airflow and that activity is happening throughout your pile. Finally, moisture. The easiest way to determine if your compost is too wet or is too dry is called the squeeze test. Put on a glove, please put on a glove. Grab it, squeeze it. If it drips, it's too wet and you need to turn it and get some stuff going to try to dry it. If it immediately falls apart, then it's too dry. If it's fairly early in the process, it might already be too dry just because it hasn't really formed that compost material yet. It's still kind of food scraps. So don't worry about that. But if you have something that is fairly mature and you're working through and you squeeze it and it's falling apart and crumbling on you, then it's too dry. If it is too wet, then you want to turn it in order to try to dry it out and then check it a little bit later. If it is too dry, you may want to add some water. I hesitate even saying that because I have seen so many photos recently of people hosing down their compost piles to try to get like water working there. Do not hose down your compost pile. At the very least, get a small bucket and slowly add a little bit of water while you're mixing it in and turning it. If you are just hosing down your compost pile, what you are doing is you are taking any nutrients and possibly pathogens that are being worked out and you're putting them into surface runoff, and that is going to head straight probably into a storm drain or a local waterway. That is a huge no-no. We spend a lot of time working with farmers specifically to avoid doing that. So this is your disclaimer. If your compost is too dry, you're going to slowly add a small amount of water while turning it to get it moist again. Compost do's and don'ts. I'm going to give you more do's than don'ts because I do not want to scare you. And again, there are lots of resources out there that can help you with this. So I don't want anyone to feel intimidated or worried about this. This is very doable. You are going to be fine. Douglas Adams, don't panic. Do have more than one pile. 2 or 3 is usually good. Ideally, you have a pile that is currently working and digesting, and you have a pile that has already been digested that you can use. You want to be able, you want to have a place to put your scraps so that you have sort of that waste pile, and then you also want to have another pile, at least one more pile as a resource to take away. Keep it a bucket of brown, meaning leaves or sawdust, nearby and covered. You want to keep it covered because brown is best when it is dry. Monitor your heat or moisture, but don't get obsessed. You want to check. You want to make sure that it's not getting too hot, it's not getting too moist, but do not get obsessed with it. You don't need to monitor it constantly. If it's a little bit under, a little bit over, it's going to be fine. And do think about where you'll use it. A friend of mine a little while ago built herself I built her a compost pile and got it out there and working. And after about 6 months, she was like, I have no idea what to do with this. I was like, oh, well, we shouldn't have built this for you then. You need to be able to do something with it. Under the don'ts, don't add feces, meat, and dairy. A lot of people, more people than I thought, will occasionally go, oh, my dog, creates fertilizer in my yard every day. I'll put that in my compost pile. Don't do that. There is some composting techniques that will allow you to process feces, meat, dairy, high-fat foods like oils, even bones. But those are a little bit advanced. So until you really nail that, just those are 3 things not to add: feces, meat, and dairy. Don't hose your pile down, as I already said. Don't forget to add brown. Don't just turn this into a trash pit and keep throwing more and more food scraps into it, and forget that it needs to have that balance, that high carbon material. And also don't forget about your pile. After it breaks, this goes along with think about where you use it. After it develops into a resource to use, make sure to use it. Otherwise, it's just kind of sitting there. It's not doing anybody any good. So landscaping activities for soil, this will be my last section, and I'll move through it fairly quickly because Kat did a great job talking about this. One of the things that we talked about was either not raking leaves or raking leaves into one area. If you really want to get your leaves out, you don't want them on your yard, totally understandable, but still keep them in your home in some way, on your yard. Leaves are really good for pollinators for a lot of different reasons. The Xerces Society has a lot of information about this. I'm more than happy to share with folks. Get plants with deep roots, especially a lot of prairie plants will have deep roots. I read a book where a farmer referred to prairie plants with very deep roots as his nutrient pumps, because their roots got way down into the mineral soil and then was pulling out all of the water, all of the mineral nutrients up into the leaves, and then they would die back and they would work into the topsoil. It's awesome. Do trim back your plants annually, especially if you have native plants. You can trim them back. The leaves or branches will fall down to, and then go ahead and leave them in place, and then they'll degrade and nutrify your soil. And then use biodegradable coverings like wood chips or even leaves. Talking about native plants and why they are good for soil, they are pre-adapted for our soil nutrient balance and our soil nutrient networks, meaning that they work with the native soils that are already here. They have adaptation strategies to get nutrients that we might be lacking. They have deep roots and they have dieback or leaves. So when they go down, they get organic and material nutrients. They bring it up into their branches and leaves, and then they die back and they drop those to the topsoil, where the folks in the topsoil, the microinvertebrates and other microorganisms in the soil turn that into good bioavailable nutrients. And then finally, and this one specifically at Kristen's request, mulching around plants. This is something that we cover quite often, but we're going to do it again because this is a really important thing, especially if we're talking about sheet mulching. Mulching around plants, you want to do a ring mulch. Ideally, you want to try to get it at what is called the drip line or the root line. If you look at the canopy of a plant or a tree, the edge of the leaves is called the drip line, and that is also commonly the root line. Not always, but it's a good enough analogy. You want nutrients to be right at that edge so that they are falling into the edge of the roots, and also the water from the leaves are dropping onto that. So that's your perimeter. That's where you want to put the mulch. You want to make sure that the root crowns are exposed. Roots breathe. If you try to put mulch over the top of the roots, you're going to damage the plant several ways, and it is not going to be able to survive. So when you're mulching around trees, when you're mulching around anything, you want to shoot for that line. You want to try to get in the big donut. The picture at the top is what you want. The picture down below, we call the mulch volcano. That is bad. You do not want that. That tree is probably not going to survive unless hopefully the person who took that picture took time to fix that issue. So as I said, there's a ton of resources out there. You do not need to feverishly write these down or try to screen capture this. This presentation is going to be available. All of these resources are going to be available for you. In general, Snohomish CD, we have a ton of stuff about composting and sheet mulching. The Spruce is a pretty good publication that makes a lot of great sort of like initial how-to guides. And then I'll make a quick note if you're thinking, oh, that's great. I like the idea of using native plants, but I don't know where to get them. Well, SCD has a plant sale coming up. So that link down there that says theplantsale.org, we will be selling native plants. Also come back next weekend where myself and Monica Vanderveer will be doing an entire presentation on native plants, if that sounded like something you wanted to do. That is the end of my time. I'm more than happy to answer some questions now, along with Kat and Kristen.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Yes, so thanks also to Kat, because she was very active in the chat and was able to answer everyone's questions from after her talk. So we just have a few left. And I think one that we missed was, can I compost without encouraging the neighborhood rats and raccoons?
Yes, so that is a big one. And I will say this because I generally get one of two sides. Is I hate wildlife and I don't want them in my compost. Other people say I love wildlife. What do I do? So on and so forth. You want to secure your compost. You want to have some kind of latch, even a lock or something that you can put on there, and you want to have all four sides. It is very dangerous to allow any kind of wildlife into your composting. It's just not a safe environment for them. So regardless, I actually love raccoons. I grew up in the Midwest where they're much nicer than they are out here. And I do not want anything bad to happen to them. In general, if you have an issue with wildlife, if you're calling from Linwood, by the way, y'all have the most prodigious rabbit infestation that I've ever seen in my life. So you also need to be really careful with making sure that is locked up.
Okay. And then sun versus shade for compost bin placement.
It highly depends. If you put it out in the sun, it is going to get warmer and wetter. So if there's a place where you can kind of put it in the shade of a building in particular, if you're that might be a good way to keep it a little bit more even temperatured and dry. I do not suggest putting it underneath like a tree. If you have a large Doug fir, don't try to stick your compost right up underneath, because then that's going to be going directly onto the roots of the Doug fir. So I hope that distinction is apparent.
Great. And this one might be a question for Kat. Can you please talk about all of the rocks in our soil and if that creates issues for nutrition?
I mean, rocks eventually are a source of nutrients. I mean, that's how we get soil. It's one of the primary components of soil, but it does take a very, very long time, and it can be annoying to plant in.
Yes.
True.
Yes. Yeah, it will not cause a real problem. Again, if you're using native plants, you'll be planting things that are, evolutionarily speaking, used to glacial till, and they will be just fine.
All right, great. And then another question: how best to mitigate nitrogen leaching over time from woody compost and mulch? Does adding alfalfa pellets help?
That is not a problem that I have ever controlled for. Again, if you're adding it to a bed of some kind, I suppose that you would want to try to control for that. But if you're adding woody mulch over like a yard or something, I just wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, if you're talking about adding mulch in large quantities near a sensitive area, like along a river bank or something like that, I would really recommend planting in it instead of just adding mulch or compost to that area, because really the best way to mitigate leaching is to have plants available to uptake those nutrients.
That's great. Beth just got back to us and said that she is talking about in beds. But for anyone wondering, I 100% agree with Kat on that. Filter strips and making the nutrients less bioavailable by having something to eat them is your best bet. If you're talking about in beds, I think that I would just really be careful about how much mulch I was adding, and then be careful about the type of mulch that I'm adding. You would, in general, if you're adding woody mulch to beds, you're not necessarily doing it for nutrients. You're doing it for soil protection, like weeding. And so you'll want something that will break down more slowly anyway. So check the species that you're getting, and that may solve some of your problems. And Carol just asked the question: dyed mulch the problem? Yeah, don't do it. That is my opinion on dyed mulch. I understand that, like, especially like beauty bark and stuff, folks really like. I get it. And then like the red dyed mulch, it does not add any value, and it wears off so quickly. Like it fades so fast. I think that those are both, and I say this as somebody who was a commercial landscaper for several years. I think those products exist for the landscapers to put them down, take a nice photo, and walk away. Not necessarily for the homeowner who's going to be staring at it for the next 4 years. There are so many resources to get natural, local, high quality, like wood chips and mulches, and so many better products than dyed.
Awesome.
David, there's a question that I tried to answer that I would like to get your opinion on as well about turning compost in the winter.
Yeah.
I think in Western Washington, anything that's living here is not going to be worms, compost worms, vermiculture stuff is not going to really be hurt by our winter because it's so mild. But I'm wondering but somebody is concerned about freezing their worms if they are turning the compost every week.
Yeah, that is an instance where I would not suggest turning it as often in the winter. If we hit like our deep freeze like we did recently, where we were at sub-zero temperatures, sub-freezing temperatures.
Not quite.
Yeah. I have a problem because I'm trying to teach myself to do everything in centigrade, and so I will occasionally be like, it's -4, and people are like, it's absolutely not -4. So my apologies. In sub-freezing temperatures, those days were also fairly dry. I would say go ahead and leave them alone. Similarly, and this is an important fact, snow on the top does not necessarily equal moisture in the pile itself. Snow is, if anything, will actually protect the pile and insulate the pile from both water and heat. So if you are looking at your pile and there's snow over the top of it, leave it alone. Don't worry about it.
Okay. There was another question, I think, that got lost about using bamboo leaves for the brown material in the compost. Is that okay? The leaves itself.
Don't risk it. Sorry. I am so sorry. A little bit of my sheet went down the wrong pipe. I mean, this is maybe just how I feel about bamboo in general. I would not risk it. There are so many versions of bamboo that will reseed vegetatively that it's just, I would not risk it. I sound like I'm being really emotional over bamboo, which frankly, bamboo does upset me to a certain degree. But really, if you want to compost bamboo, if you want to get rid of the bamboo leaves, either put it in your green bin and have the city compost it in one of their industrial composters, or there are specific ways that you can do. You can build a compost to work in really high heat that will kill they'll basically kill the plant matter, including any seeds and blackberry and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my suggestion. It's just don't risk it. If bamboo takes over your compost pile, you're never getting it back. It's time to go build a new pile. So
okay.
One of the other ones is, how would you recommend revitalizing a big lawn that has recently formed very large dead spots? I have a bias against lawns, and I would say, oh, you should sheet mulch it and replace those dead spots with other plants other than lawn. But David might have a better answer for actually revitalizing that lawn. You might.
So the two things that I ask when somebody says, I have this lawn, I want to hang on to it. I try not to judge because I'm a cat. But the two questions are, do you have children / grandchildren, or dogs? Because if that's the case, then yes, you should absolutely keep some lawn, because those things are important to particular critters. Clover is the best thing. It's very easy to maintain. It doesn't get particularly large, and you can kind of leave it as is. A friend of mine recently bought a house. They have dogs. their dogs were tearing up huge as they were running around the yard. And I got them a line on Rainier white clover to basically go down, and now they have this lovely clover patch where their dogs can go and run, and they don't have to try to mow it. They don't have to mess around with any of that stuff. But it still looks like a nice green area, and then the dogs have access to it. So, and then on top of that, it's building their soil. So if they do in the future want to do something that isn't lawn related, they'll have that.
All right. I think the last question, I know it's 11:32, also has to do with grass and lawns, that somebody's grass dries out really fast because it's built on top of a bunch of sand from the development or whatever. So is there a way to kind of hold more water in that grass area?
I think Kat got that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just keep adding compost
Yep.
over
Oh yeah, I see it.
time.
Thanks.
That's gonna help your lawn hold on to water a little bit longer.
Okay.
And there are lots of questions about buying clover.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Another
Wow.
question about buying clover. So the one that I suggested is harder to find and expensive. I got it for them as a gift because I knew where to find it. It's called Rainier white clover. It is technically the only native clover in Washington. So if you are really hardcore natives only, we do have a native clover. Besides that, what I generally recommend people get, and it's not invasive, it doesn't cause a problem, is Russian red or white clover. That is the most commercially and industrially available version. It is very similar to our clover. You aren't going to, it's not like creeping buttercup. You aren't going to be causing a problem if you install it. It doesn't seed like that. But it's very good. If your soil is terrible, you can get the nitrogen coated stuff. I don't recommend it. Start with the non-nitrogen coated stuff. I near my house that uses basically a big trash heap. I go there once a week, clean the trash out, and toss down nitrogen clover because the soil is so good. That stuff would basically grow on concrete if you let it. So if you go, I have horrible clay soil, just clay and rock, I can't make it work, Russian red clover will grow there, I promise.
Awesome. Okay. And I just put the link in the chat for registering for the next class, I think. So, oh, you know what? Nope, that's not the next class. But the next class is landscaping with native plants with David and Monica. And you can just find that link on the Wastewater Treatment Division events page. All of the classes are listed there. So if you just Google King County Wastewater Treatment Division events, you should be able to find it. So hope to see you all at the next class. Thank you so much for joining, and yeah, get out in that yard. Take care.
Thank you all so much. Great questions.
Thanks to David and Kat.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, enjoy the brief sunlight that you have here in Western Washington before it's again this afternoon.